Welcome back to my channel. My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to be telling you everything I read in the month of January. We are, of course, as is typical of this channel, running a few minutes late, a few minutes behind schedule. And by a few minutes, I mean it is the 5th as I'm filming it. Oh, that's not too bad. It's an exciting day here, where as I'm recording this, less than 12 hours ago, no, more than 12 hours ago, less than 24 hours ago, Taylor Swift did announce that we're getting her 11th album. What was it called? Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. I can't remember. It's her first like 3-word title. Although I think 1989 honestly is like a pretty long title. But let's see. It's called the Tortured Poets Department. As she was announcing it last night, I was too flustered by the fact that it was like a new album. I was like thoroughly prepared for Reputation, Taylor's version, like thoroughly prepared. I think most of us Taylor girlies were thoroughly prepared for it to be Reputation, and it wasn't. And I was so flustered by this that I didn't catch the name, and I did have to go on her Instagram and look up the name because I was just in shock and awe. But I'm excited. It's looking to me like it's going to be kind of like a sultrier version of Folklore. That's what I'm always hoping. I'm a Folklore Evermore girl till I die, and so like I always am holding out hope for Woodvale. So anyway, those are my Taylor Swift thoughts, in case you were wondering. I hope you were, because I can't help but share them. That's all I can talk about. But we're gonna take a break from all of my Taylor thoughts about the new album that's coming out in April to tell you everything I read in January. I feel very strongly that the first book of the year should really kind of like set the tone for the vibes for the year. I want a good like 5-star or close to 5-star as I can get book for the first of the year. Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This was a little risky because this is Ali Hazelwood's first YA novel. And I love Ali Hazelwood's adult stuff. I'm like a convert, was not a huge fan of The Love Hypothesis, kind of didn't get the hype, and then loved her next two. Loved Love on the Brain and loved Love Theoretically. Like, amazing. Ali Hazelwood is the best at like capturing like joy in romance novel form. Like, I think she's truly the best at it. Love it. Kisses. But I was nervous because YA is not always my favorite. I just don't love following YA characters. But I felt like this was very, very upper YA. Like, I think our characters were 18 and 20. We're following this girl who is just graduated high school. I think she's in that kind of summer after senior year, but she's not going off to college because her mom is a single mom. Her father has passed away. She has 2 younger sisters, and her mom has really bad arthritis and so is unable to work in the same capacity she normally has. And so this girl has been like supporting her family. But in the past, she has been a chess player, and she was like a very competitive chess player. Her dad was also a chess player, but she stopped playing chess a few years ago and doesn't play anymore. But at the very beginning of the novel, her best friend is like, we need one more person to compete in this chess competition with our team. Like, please just do it for me. And she agrees. She's like, okay, fine. I will do it for you because I love you. And she gets there and she beats this guy. And it turns out this guy is like the up and coming star. He's like young. I think he's 19 or 20, but he's like beating all of these like chess grandmasters. And so she becomes like talk of the chess town, and she winds up getting this like fellowship that essentially will play her to play and compete in like these chess competitions. So instead of working at the mechanic where she was working before, now she's doing chess full time. And I think the biggest difference I found between Ali Hazelwood's YA stuff and her adult stuff, she saw a little bit more like focus on the personal character development of our heroine over the romance. Like, I almost felt like the romance was slightly more of a subplot than the main plot. And I really loved that. Like, I love everything that Ali Hazelwood does. I thought they were both great, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her character arc. I loved the romance too. Like, the romance is clearly like a very prominent part. The romance between Mallory and Nolan, our main duo, was also excellent, but I loved Mallory's character arc and her relationship with her family and her relationship with her sisters and her relationship with her friends as she navigates this transition from like high school to whatever sort of next steps adulthood's going to take her in. I just loved that how Ali Hazelwood explored that. I loved it. I really, really enjoyed this. It was a great first read of the year. My second book of the year was Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This book actually had started at the end of 2023 and didn't want it to be my first like finish of the year, so I like put it on pause while I read Check and Mate. So Iron Flame is the second book in the like Empyrean Empyrean series, which started with Fourth Wing. So it's like a Dragon Academy book, and it picks up where Fourth Wing left off, so I won't get into plot too much. But I did want to talk about kind of my thoughts on this book, because I think I echoed a lot of feelings that I've been hearing around, and that is that this book, I think, struggled as a second book. Like, it was not my favorite. It is very long, and it felt very long. It's almost 900 pages, and it felt quite long. The first book, because it's like fantasy romance, the first book is really like, the romance is like a really strong central point, but by the end of the book, like, the romance is kind of like run its arc for the most part. And while they're still like working through things in the second book in their romantic relationship, that relationship is much less of the focus, and we focus more on the larger like fantasy world plot that's happening with the, like, you know, battle between good and evil that you always experience in a fantasy romance or a fantasy novel in general. And I felt like that was a little bit weaker than the romance plot, and so by focusing in on that, I feel like you really start to see kind of the cracks in this. It's not that I wouldn't recommend this book series, because I think I still would. I think Fourth Wing is such an excellent like beginner fantasy novel. I think a lot of people found that as like an introductory into the world of fantasy, which I think is so great and excellent. I think the world building is really easy to understand and really easy to digest, which I think can be one of the largest hurdles in jumping into a new fantasy world, is like the world building can be just like, a lot to deal with. And Rebecca Yarros really eases you in with Fourth Wing. But I think because she really eases you in with Fourth Wing, we had to do a lot more world building in this book, and it slowed things down. And when we were used to the pace of the first book, that became a little bit harder in this book. I also will say that this is not my like favorite fantasy romance. I know a lot of people were like swept off their feet, loved it, 5 stars. And it was not that, and Fourth Wing wasn't that for me. So I already came in feeling a little bit more middling than I think a lot of people did. Then I read another long one, and I have like a confession that goes with this. I read Keeping 13, which is the second book in the Boys of Tommen series by Chloe Walsh. And if you like have been following closely, you might be like, I don't remember you ever reading Binding 13, the first book in the series. And that is because I didn't. This book, I've been seeing a ton on my TikTok. Like, TikTok has just been like, I think you'll like this. And based on the descriptions, I wasn't sure. It reminded me a lot of the Addicted series by Krista and Rebecca Richty, which, despite the fact I've read like 7 or 8 books in this series, is not like necessarily my favorite, and definitely not like the type of romance I necessarily love, which is going to be like more friendship based, more like drama based, where like it's not these series of standalones. We're like really following like a larger story arc and like the interconnected dynamics of these characters over many, many years. To me, these sometimes have the tendency to be a little bit more plotless in the individual books. Like, we're just like on the journey with them rather than following like a traditional arc, which is generally my preference, is like a more traditional story arc. But on the day that I started this, I knew I really wanted to read this specifically. I had like a bad day, and I wanted like an angsty romance, and I knew that this book was going to give it to me. But I also knew the first book was kind of like super slow burn, and I was not ready for that. And so, in fact, I did skip the first 300 pages of the first book, and also skip any scenes that didn't include Johnny and Shannon, our like couple, in them together, to get to the second book. The second book I read almost in its entirety. I did still skip a few chapters, but I felt really comfortable saying this. And as someone who writes books, this is like disgraceful. I hope Chloe Walsh never sees this. I think Chloe Walsh probably wrote a gorgeous book. It was just not the book I needed at the time. And so I made my own. I DIY'd myself a little book that I needed. This book follows the Boys of Tommen. So it's this private high school in Ireland in the early 2000s. And we're following a bunch of people in these friend groups, and they all kind of have troubled pasts and home lives that they're dealing with to some extent, some of them more than others, and all the boys are on the rugby team. And so this one we're following Johnny and Shannon. The first 2 books are following Johnny and Shannon. Shannon has been bullied like extremely from her last school, and so she moves to this private school. She also has a very tumultuous home life. Definitely look up content warnings if that sort of stuff might be upsetting to you. And she winds up striking up a relationship with Johnny, who is like the star rugby player on the school's rugby team. It was very cute. It's very angsty. It's a little bit more wandering, and they're like chunky. They're chunky books, but like a good time. I enjoyed them for what they were. Then I read Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. It's another, I was reading like chunkers this month. A lot of like longer books. Storygraph is saying this was 530 pages. I do remember it feeling like a little bit longer. Like, I remember it feeling, I was like, oh, this is like a substantial romance. I read it on my Kindle, so like sometimes you don't really know. But this one felt, you know, lengthy. Lauren Asher wrote the Dreamland Billionaire series, and this is another billionaire series. We love a billionaire. Not in real life, but in a romance novel. I do enjoy a billionaire romance. This one is following this guy who's like a real estate mogul, and he still lives in his hometown where he grew up, which is just outside of Chicago. And his like childhood friend, enemy, they had a tumultuous sort of relationship, moves back into town. And their moms are best friends, so they're kind of immediately thrust into similar like social situations. And he's always had like a little bit of a crush on her, but she thinks that he hates her. And they wind up having to work together on this project where they're renovating this beautiful old house in town, because she has like an HGTV type show that has gotten nixed because it was with her ex-fiance. Now that they're broken up, she has nothing to do, so she's in town working on this house. And he, like I said, is a real estate mogul, so he's like funding the project, and they're working together on this project while like working through the traumas that prevented them from getting together in the first place. This to me felt like a very standard romance. Like I said, it's a longer one. We've got a little bit of enemies to lovers. Honestly, like he's kind of pretty mean to her in the beginning in a way that I was like, oh, but like, you know, turns cute moments. He's a lot of money, so they like get to do fun rich people things. I don't know. It was not bad. It was not bad, not excellent, like really, really middle of the road romance for me. The next book I read was like such a surprise. I read it for a video that should be coming out soon, and that is The Hero of This Book by Elizabeth McCracken. I wouldn't have picked up this book except it was on like a YouTuber's favorites list, and this book is like auto fiction, I think. It is, well, I don't know. It's hard to say for sure. It's a like super short little novel that follows this woman over the course of one day she spends in London as she's reflecting back on her mother. Her mother has recently passed away, and she's taken this trip to London like pretty shortly after her mother's death, and the last time she was in London she was with her mother. So she's kind of reflecting on that previous trip, but also just like her relationship with her mother over the years, and also her relationship to her writing. She's a writer, and she spends a lot of time reflecting on the autobiographical nature of writing and of fiction, and to the point where it becomes a little unclear to the reader, like what is the character who's experiencing this day in London and what is like the author, like who is saying what. And I think that line was really intentionally blurred, and really blurred in an interesting way, and had some really interesting things to say about what it means to like write fiction and like put elements of yourself in it, but also make it fictional. And I really loved it. I really thought it was like truly excellent. Next, we read another like Kindle Unlimited romance, and this is P.S. You're Intolerable by Julia Wolf. I read this book because I saw it in two places. The first place I saw it was Pot Roast Mom, and Pot Roast Mom did not recommend it, but she did not recommend it. She just kind of said that that's what she was reading. And honestly, the premise sounded interesting, and so I was gonna pick it up anyway. And then Chandler Ainsley read it, and she like, I think enjoyed it more than she expected to. I don't think she loved it, but I think she enjoyed it. I don't remember. And so I decided to give it a go, and it was like better than I thought. I was kind of expecting this to be like just like a total brain candy, turn your brain off Kindle Unlimited romance, but I like honestly felt like the romance was like pretty solid, and like a little bit more emotional, and like the characters were more developed and those sorts of things than I was like anticipating based on the premise. So the premise as it's like presented to you is P.S. You're Intolerable comes from the fact this is like a boss-assistant romance, and this assistant, her boss is like truly terrible. He's so mean to her, and so every day as she like writes down his schedule for the day on this notepad, she also writes like a postscript that's like P.S. something, like P.S. I hope you step in a puddle and your socks are wet all day, or like P.S. you are a horrible mean robot man, those sorts of things. But she would rip them off the bottom. Obviously she's not handing those to her boss, and she sticks them in an envelope in her desk. Okay, like the setup, the premise, where the title comes from. Really the heart of this romance though is this woman, when she gets the job, she's pregnant, and she got pregnant from like a one-night stand sort of thing. Like she's still friends with the guy, but they're not romantically involved. She's also like renovating this house and having money troubles with this, like very tumultuous home situation, parenting situation happening. And we also have this like boss assistant dynamic, and the boss winds up essentially like helping her out. And that's a little bit of a spoiler, but we don't wind up getting to like the romance. Like it's very slow burn to start off with, because I think it takes a while for us to like get to the romance. Like we spent a lot of time in the enemies sort of stage of things, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting. I thought the characters were both really interesting, and I really liked the romance. But I will let you know that it does involve like pregnancy. Then there's a baby. She's like a single mom for like a good chunk of the book as well. Like she has the child like mid-bookish. So if that's not something you're into, I would not recommend this. But if you really enjoyed Out on a Limb by, I'll put it up here because I can't remember who the author of that was. If you really enjoyed Out on a Limb I might recommend this one as well. Different dynamic. Like, it's definitely more of like an enemies to lovers type situation, and he is not the father of the child, but still fun and fresh. Next, I read Never by Jessa Hastings. This was a book I was so excited to read. I was really looking forward to this because I am such a big fan of Jessa's original series, Magnolia Parks. And this book is her first book in a new series that is like a fantasy romance, Peter Pan, almost like fan fiction. It's not like Peter Pan, the original novel is like canon, and this is following Wendy's great-granddaughter, I think. So at the end of last year, I reread, or I didn't reread, it was the first time I actually had read, I read Peter Pan for this because Jessa said like it's better to have the familiarity with the first book, because I think the biggest part of this is in the original Peter Pan, it's like canon that Wendy's daughter and her daughter's daughter go to Neverland. Like, Peter comes and picks them up and takes them to Neverland for a time, like every generation. And so we're following that kind of legacy of them taking the Darling girls to Neverland. And so we're following, I think, the 4th generation of these girls who have gone to Neverland, and she's about to turn 18 and she still hasn't been taken. Normally they go between the ages of like 12 and like 16, and she is 17, gonna be 18, about to head off to Oxford in the spring. This does take place in like the 1970s, I believe, and she still hasn't been taken by Peter. And so they're like, oh, maybe he like forgot. You know, like, we don't know what's happening. But she does wind up getting taken. That's like the very beginning of the novel. Peter shows up, takes her to Neverland, but he's older, and the island has like changed a lot from the time of like Wendy being on Neverland. This is like way too much of a plot synopsis. Should you read this book? Because once again, I'm always like very hesitant to broadly recommend Jessa Hastings because I think her writing style is so unique, and despite the fact that I love them so much, I don't know that, like, it's not a book that I would widely recommend, because I think either the writing style is going to work for you or not work for you. I feel like this is even more of like Jessa Hastings being Jessa Hastings than Magnolia Parks in many ways. To me, it almost read like Magnolia Parks, like the character from those novels wrote this book. That's how like in the Jessa Hastings kind of tone it is. And I also think there's an element of surrealist fantasy that I don't think we see very often. You know, where we do see it, we normally see it in like children's stories. So it's emulating that sort of magic we had in Peter Pan. But it's not something you would normally see in like an adult fantasy. And when I say like surrealist fantasy, I mean like fantasy that has like really no rhyme or reason. Like, it is like magical for the sake of being magical, and like things will happen because they happen. Like this island, Neverland, that they go to, like the ocean is alive, and there's in the clouds there's this place where they can like drop off their like baggage, their like memories and things that they like don't want to deal with anymore. And the relationship with like Peter and the island is like very strange and magical. It is really unique, but I don't think it's for everyone. I think if you like really need like a rhyme and reason and like clear defined rules with your magic, you're not gonna love this. I also think if you are really bothered by like toxicity and you need your like romantic relationships to, while they might have some faults, in the end be like good for all the characters involved, this also might not be for you. There's like a love triangle that we're set up, and all options are like, you know, really have their flaws. And I've been hearing a lot of people when they talk about their reviews of this being like really turned off by some of the things that the men do in this story that are supposed to be the romantic interest, because like, how can you get behind either of the choices when they're both acting like this? But like, I don't know, didn't bother me too much. Like, that's not something that I like, and I find completely necessary to enjoy a book, especially a book with like a wider world. There is a lot happening beyond just that romance triangle. That's my recommendation. Also, the cover is so stunning. I'm obsessed with the cover. Last book I read in January was Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver, another one that I saw all over the place on TikTok, and then my library like had a copy, and so I decided to read it. And this book was just like the definition of a book that I was like, oh, this wasn't for me, but like it was good, and I know that it would be for other people, but it just wasn't the book for me. We're following two serial killers. They're both like Dexter style serial killers in that they're killing only bad guys, so we love that. And they meet at the very beginning of the novel when something goes awry for one of them, and the other one has to like come in and rescue them. And then we follow them over the course of years. Like, this story takes place over like a pretty long stretch, as they have this game where once a year they meet up to hunt down like a bad guy together and see who can get him first. essentially. And so that's like the premise. And the reason that it sounded really appealing to me, and it sounded appealing to a version of me that I just don't think I am anymore. I, in my old age, have gotten like more and more like sensitive to like violence. And this book is like pretty gruesome and pretty gory, and I just wasn't anticipating the level at which I would have a hard time oscillating between that like gore and gruesomeness to the romance. Like there's a sort of levity that which they necessarily treat these like creepy things. Like it is done in a way that's so outlandish that it feels kind of like, I don't want to say silly because it's not like silly, but there's like a lightness to their like murdering, because these serial killers are like created as like almost like supervillain type things where they have these like very specific things they do, and like they feel unreal. And then we're going to like also very graphic spicy time. Like this was like spice level pretty high, and I just like really had a hard time transitioning between those two things. Like my brain couldn't do both things at once, and I think I'm just like becoming too sensitive in my old age. I think if I had read this when I was like 20, I probably would have absolutely loved it, and I just, you know, for cutting someone's eyeballs out, it's gonna stick with me for a little bit, and I'm gonna have a hard time switching to like a confession of love. But I know a lot of people have loved this, and I think it is really well written. It was really compelling. I read the whole thing like in a single day because I wanted to know what was happening. It just like, it's not a series I'm going to continue in because it like just didn't match my vibe, but I thought it was so great. I like want to let you know that just because I didn't like it doesn't mean you will not like it, because I really do think it's a solid book. It just wasn't a book for me. That is all I read in January. We're already pretty deep into February. Have we finished any books yet? No, and I am 7 books behind on my reading goal. We like to keep things nice and behind. I'm currently reading the second Crescent City book, and by second I mean third. I'm reading the new Crescent City book, and I've been trying to take it kind of slow because I don't think we're getting another Sarah J Maas book for at least a year, probably more like 2 years, and so I don't want to rush through this one. So I've been trying to take my time with it. I'm a little more than halfway through. If you spoil anything about the second Crescent City book, and by second, once again, I do mean third, I will come for you. So do know that. But that's all. I will talk to you soon. If you want to tell me what you read this month, like your favorite book that you read this month, or all the books you read this month, you know, go off. I would love to hear about it in the comments. Okay.